Hello. Well, today's August 14th, 2013, and yeah, surprise, surprise, what am I doing here? Well, as many of you have asked, and as I feel obliged and out of whatever necessity, of course, I'll give a small update from time to time. But really, this one isn't about news so much, although I do want to mention a couple of things. You know, we make we look at all the information that comes to us and we try our best to figure out what the game plan is of those who are basically tyrants and want to rule and control us rather than lead us the proper way by showing us examples of how to sustain liberty and life and the pursuit of happiness. They want to rule us with all of these tyrannical authoritarian measures. And a lot of the population probably deserves that. And the question always is who does and who doesn't deserve it. And I'm going to get to that in a few minutes, primarily because of what StormCloudsGathering put out here a little while ago about the process of making change. He's really a great guy, gives a lot of good information, as are some of the others that I've mentioned to you. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. But I kind of wanted to talk about this thing about trying to figure out when situations that we see coming will occur, because that's always the hard thing, trying to put a timeline on something, especially when the opposition, the authoritarians, the tyrants, always can choose the time and the place. And so that makes it difficult for us, even given all of the information. So a lot of people, I guess what I want to say here is a lot of people will say, well, see, your prediction didn't come true. Well, are you going to say the same thing, those of you who say that? Are you going to say the same thing to the government that has time and time again told us that there was going to be a terror attack and there wasn't one? For instance, in this last couple of weeks, when they said that they had to close the embassies overseas and that a terror attack was imminent. Now, I'm not saying that they can't stage something or whatever. But the point is that they do control us. We just have to look at the information, as I said, kind of like from an intelligence information perspective. You gather the information, you make your best prediction, your best estimate based on the evidence. And of course, the one thing that is always going to change is the exact time, as I mentioned in D-Day. So I just wanted to say that for all of you who want to argue over the fact that things don't happen exactly on a timetable or even in the exact way that we anticipate. Those things will happen. It's just that it just depends upon the powers that be as to the time element involved and exactly how it will play out. But you'll notice that nobody ever comes after the establishment for making the types of things that they did. And admittedly, this time, of course, to take our attention off of things that are going on in our country, particularly the illegal surveillance by the government. They say, oh, it's necessary, we got to make you comfortable with it for your safety and all that. Those are not reasons to violate the Constitution. Sorry, they're just not. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. No law that is made contrary to that is legal, and it is null and void on its inception, according to Madison, Marbury versus Madison, which was done about two centuries ago. Okay, well, a lot of things going on, and I'm not here to really go through all that today. As I said, I'm actually after something else. And StormCloudsGathering really gave me something to think about. And as you know, for a long time now, I've been talking about the necessity of gathering with people of like-mindedness, right? In other words, not just in communications, but actually co-locating with these types of people. And if you go watch a couple of his videos, one's called something Revolution, and I'm sorry I don't recall what it is right now. I do that a lot, I know. It's a recent one within the last week or so, 2 weeks maybe. Revolution, a manual, I believe, something like that. It's really important because this idea of like-minded people gathering together isn't just something that I'm saying. It's apparently a spiritual emotional, genetic, maybe genetic memory, for those of you who aren't spiritually oriented, realization that that's what it's going to take to pull us through this. A lot of people are recognizing now that the system as we see it today is going to be destroyed. It is coming down one way or another, if nothing else than by its own weight. But Washington and its cronies, its military-industrial intelligence complex, all the corporatocracy, the fascism that's all there, is overburdening a very, very small system that supports it. And of course it's making the rest of the world very angry. And eventually a lot of innocent people are going to be injured and killed because of these idiots, these tyrants in Washington and its affiliates. And I mean here in the United States, the world will retaliate at some point in time, if not sooner or later. So what am I saying? That there is something to this gathering that's so necessary. The StormCloudsGathering talks about the Iroquois Nation. It was actually made up of about 6 or 8 different tribes who had a loose confederation, and upon that basic concept was really the beginning of the United States. They fashioned us after that. The Iroquois didn't even have a central government, but of course we fashioned one with a very, supposedly supposed to be a weak central government, but strong enough to take care of the common defense and things like that. Well, with this transition in spiritual understanding that I believe is coming, and it's actually already here, I've discovered. It is. It has been here for at least 2,000 years, and I'm going to read something here in a minute to show what I'm talking about. We have the basics to make this transformation. Central statist government that is authoritarian, hierarchical, its days are over with. It's had its 6, 8, 10, 25,000 years to prove, which it has, without a doubt, incontrovertibly, it has proven to be a failure, destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and destructive of the earth itself, even though that they've latched onto this global warming and ecology business for their own purposes. The fact of the matter is that they are the ones that caused it in the first place, not the little people. So there is something about this awakening, this spiritual awakening. We can have diversity in cultures. We can have diversity in thought. Those are allowed. And as a matter of fact, in some of the early writings, they called it the kingdom of God. And I know a lot of people don't like me going into scriptural things, but the idea was that everyone had a like mind, that they weren't, and this isn't utopian, by the way, because there is such a thing as common defense. But the people understand that what's best for them is cooperation amongst differing cultural groups. Unification seems to be a tool of the devil, the singularity, the soup, those types of things, control of the one, where in God's creation, as I've mentioned so many times, it's variety, it's diversification, it's the love of creation. Big difference in what we see. But what I would like to do here is, a lot of people have talked about my background, and I asked some folks if I should go into that, my personal background, and give a little history of it. I'm not going to do that. You can find that out on your own, and it's really not the issue. What the issue is right now is liberty and freedom. And so what I will do is I will talk about 3 books that I've published, and read a few things that are in them from times past. I won't read from the first book, but after my case back in the 80s, I wrote this book here. It's called An Offender for a Word. It is basically a legal compendium and an explanation of what happened and why I did it. Now, am I trying to sell these? No, you can't even get this book. It's out of print, and if you did get it, it would be way too expensive. It's not worth buying. Well, it might be worth buying, but I wouldn't tell you to do that. The point is that you can't get it. It's out of print, and copies of it are very expensive. But that was the first book I wrote, and as you can see, I have a fallen, I don't know if you can see that there, but it has a fallen Statue of Liberty. Since I did this, I now understand what the Statue of Liberty actually is. in Babylon. It's something I would never use again. And I know that's going to sound like heresy to a lot of people, but it's just a fact. Where that came from and why it stands on Staten Island up there in New York is a rather, well, it's a horrific story actually when you get to understand the whole thing. But the principle is still the same. Liberty has fallen in this country, and really, it really failed almost right from the beginning because of course, powerful and corrupt men get in there and use the system for their own benefit and to bring about authoritarianism. Always, that's how they go. The British Crown came after us again in 1812. The War of 1812, trying to bring us back into its clutches. And when it failed to do that, then it returned back to the old time-sustained system of economic takeover, forcing you into the banking system. Well, anyway, let me go on. The second book I wrote was about my personal life. It was called I Wed Three Wives. It's right there. No, you can't get this one either. It's also out of print. Very expensive if you find them. But I wanted to read something out of the epilogue because I think it shows you where I'm coming from. And it's been this way a long time. My entire thing back then was not about sex. It wasn't about, accumulating anything. It was about what the government has a right to be involved in and what it doesn't. And it certainly doesn't have a right to be involved in our personal contracts. And that even goes for gays too, My point with that has always been it's in these alternative lifestyles, which certainly mine was one, and I could argue very, very convincingly if I wanted to take the time that what I did was biblically correct when homosexuality is not. But that's not really the issue either. The issue really does come down to government control, and the best thing for the government to do is just to stay out of these things altogether, is really where it ought to be. Not trying to control any type of personal relationship, marriage, friendship, or any association of people in whatever system that they find necessary. And that kind of goes back to these small groups that StormCloudsGathering talks about different societies still getting, being different culturally and diversified, and yet and small, no central authoritarian tyrannical power, but cooperation amongst all of them. And that's really where the concept of the kingdom of God comes in the future. You don't have to be a particular religion or anything like that, but that's another philosophy, like I've said, and I won't get into that in any detail today. But let me read this to you here because I want you to see where I was coming from. This first book here I wrote in 1986, I believe. Let me check the date here. I'm pretty sure that's when it was. Yeah, 1986. This one I wrote 10 years later in 1996. And again, remember, I was talking about liberty of the individual here and that the state doesn't have any business in certain situations. And this one was really the same thing. And this is in the epilogue. It's on page 263. Let me just read this real quick. This will take just a minute. Quote, "We need to return to pure law, in parentheses, the protection against plunder, close parentheses, and not remain in the arbitrary realms of whimsical social engineering that inevitably result in tyranny. Despite the popular myths, our democracy, which is supposed to be a democratic republic, is rife with tyranny. Although our Constitution is designed to prevent infringements by unjust majoritarian coercion and limit government interference in our lives, the so-called democracy foisted on us by our leaders allows them to act underneath the protective umbrella of the majority and commit unlawful acts in the process. Currently, the unjust monarch merely hides behind a shield for his unjust rule, the will of the collective. Where can we place responsibility in such a system? I feel as the Duke of Marlborough, who stated, quote, 'I do not believe in the collective wisdom of individual ignorance,' unquote. To correct this, we need only to ensure the inviolability of the Bill of Rights," something I've always said. Every man, woman, and child should ponder the words of Frederick Bastiat in his book, The Law. The purpose of good law is to protect liberty and the individual right to lawful defense against any encroachment. Anything more is plunder or legalized robbery, the use of the collective organization to commit an act that, if committed by an individual, would be a crime. And there's more in the epilogue, but I wanted to read that to you. So as you can see, I've been in this battle for a long time, despite disagreements on whether my particular lifestyle in the past was right or wrong, or moral or immoral, is really not the issue, because we all have to find out what the truth is on our own. And anybody else who tries to tell us what the truth is without us being able to experience it, as long as we're not hurting anyone. And they try to make arguments about that, but really hurting people. We could say that people hurt us all the time, and that's kind of where political correctness is going today, and that's wrong. People still need to be able to have their opinions, but again, that's another time for another argument. So now I'm going to read a couple of things out of the Crimson Thread. Now let me tell you a little bit about this book. This is not a rehash of the New Testament. This is from a historical perspective. Okay, that was the important thing. I'm not rehashing the New Testament here. Now there are a lot of similarities, but I pretty much stayed away from the miracles and all those kinds of things that are talked about in the New Testament. And those that I do talk about, I explain in more relevant, maybe scientific or medical terms. Not to take away from what happened, because a miracle is really anything that happens that we don't understand, and of course that has changed through time. That's not to take anything away from them, from miracles, but we have to apply a reasonable knowledge and understanding to the situation. From an historical perspective, and that's what I've done here. I have not used the faith-based perspective. So there's some glaring differences in this book between what happens here and what happens in the New Testament. And in all that I've done on this, really I only have one regret. And in this story, I'll tell you, the whipping of the money changers at the temple I had done by the brother of the person you would know as Jesus. And that decision that I did that upon was made with some historical evidence that was kind of weak, obviously, because this time period is so difficult. But I was trying to separate the two characters out, one being a lot less willing to apply physical violence than the other. But in that one regard, I was mistaken, and I will admit that here. But it still makes for an interesting story to show you the difference of the brothers, and there were 4 of them at the time. We can even prove that out of the New Testament and, of course, out of history, who were involved in this time period. So, again, this book is from an historical perspective on this family that was involved in the Messianic movement in the first century. But I wanted to read a couple of paragraphs from this book. And again, this is from 1996, and I want to just read this so you can see where I was coming from again. And this is where we kind of link in with StormCloudsGathering, because, Jesus set up apostles, first of all, that are basically ambassadors. That's really what they are. And between the 12 tribes, or between the 12 churches, or 7 churches, or, anyway, geographical locations of small groups of people separated with a loose central leadership, I guess I would put it that way, which is really the very, very best form of government for a lot of reasons. But that's for another time, and I haven't fully developed this in my mind yet. Remember, I said I wanted to go into a sphere of action, and that's why I'm not on YouTube too much right now. And I'm still working on that, but it's kind of revolving around this thing here, which, by the way, got Jesus crucified, right? Well, let me go ahead and read this. Okay, again. And I have to insert this here because I neglected in my original recording to read this to you. This is also out of my book, The Crimson Thread, and as I corrected, this was published in 2006. So let me read this as well. This is the story of the beginning of that consciousness which would cause the great kingdoms of the earth to tremble. The empires and governments of the world, the rich and powerful rulers over the common man, saw a vision of their own demise in the rising of the people to new levels of realization. During and beyond the events of this book, the great powers of the world would use highly refined systems of fear and manipulation to hide the truth of these events from subsequent generations and seek to suppress the swelling of liberty in the hearts of individuals over whom they held power. The Roman Empire, the Inquisition, and even on to the present day, the powerful try to manipulate and control the masses using a potent mixture of religiosity, superstition, and fear. But the truth whispers to our consciousness like the remembrance of a son for a father. Will we listen? In fact, what was born amongst the Jews in Judea and Galilee in 6 CE, CE is basically like AD, it means common era, but basically the same thing as AD. In direct opposition to the tax was what Josephus called the fourth philosophy, innovators, a zealot messianic movement that held inviolable the principle of liberty and the right to repel tyranny and oppression. These principles are at the very heart of a leap in consciousness that would enable mankind, despite efforts by the powerful to suppress them, to envision a world where the individuality and freedom of the soul was as important, or more so, than the government or the nation state. Indeed, as stated in the Gospels, they envisioned a kingdom not of this world, meaning the world of Caesar and tyranny in general. The original books depicting the efforts of these people were written for the Jews who lived in those times and knew the law or Torah, where we generally do not. Living under oppressive occupation, they often wrote in symbolism and parable to try and convey ideas, not the history of a real person per se. So that's the first thing I wanted to read. And then I wanted to read the very last paragraph of this introduction to you. So what I can promise here, that means in this book, is that I have attempted to keep the story within the framework of historical believability and scriptural law that a most dedicated man, represented in today's world as Jesus Christ, would surely manifest in his life in every way. While this fictionalized account may appear primarily conjecture, it is no more so than the versions handed down through the centuries by theocratic and political leaders. This depiction of the man we know as Jesus does not diminish from his purpose or his contribution to the spiritual advancement of mankind. What it does do is de-Romanize the mission of Jesus and returns his story to his Jewish origins. The message of his life and his example is that the kingdom of heaven is reached, not through the auspices or approval of any man or organization, but only through a personal relationship with the Creator and individual spiritual advancement. Therefore, it is not and cannot be bestowed upon one without warrant. If one only follows in his footsteps and obeys the law and the testimony, the individual can indeed find his way to the throne of glory. In this book, the reader will discover the humanity and the true spirituality of the man called Hamashiach. In his story is the hope of individual freedom and its cost, along with the realization that our condition is the basic blueprint for approaching the divine. StormCloudsGathering, I think you're onto something. And although I believe that this system that you're talking about has been tried in times past, maybe the consciousness of mankind has reached a point where it will work. And we can, as a people, as a species, as brothers and sisters, cast off the chains of the nation state and tyrannical, hierarchical, authoritarian rulership that has been the bane of the existence of all of us. Thank you.